The knock came at dawn, not a polite knock. 3 measured strikes, like someone who had knocked on 1,000 doors and knew exactly what waited behind each one. I was standing in the kitchen when I heard Diane's footsteps. Fast, confused, the sound of a woman who never expected consequences to find her home address. I didn't move. For 19 years, she threw my letters into the fire before I ever read a word. Every single one. She never once asked who kept writing to me. She was about to find out. Before we get to that morning, I'd love to know where you're listening from right now. Drop your country and your local time in the comments. It always means something to know who's out there. Now let me take you back to where this really started. A few hours earlier, I almost didn't go. I sat in my car outside the Hampton Inn off Route 17 for 20 minutes. Engine running, hands on the wheel, watching the wipers push the drizzle back and forth. It was just past 7 in the morning. My father's birthday party didn't start until noon. I had 5 hours to talk myself into walking into that house. I'd been doing it for years, actually. Talking myself into it. Every Christmas. Every Thanksgiving. Every birthday where I drove down from Norfolk in a rental car, with something wrapped in the back seat, and spent the whole drive rehearsing how to say hello to a woman who had made her feelings about me clear before I'd finished my first deployment. My name is Janet Wallace. I'm 48 years old. I work for the government. That's what I tell people when they ask. And most of the time, that's enough to end the conversation. I've got a small place near the base, a dog named Hendrix, who has separation anxiety and chews through exactly 1 slipper per month, and a life that probably looks very ordinary from the outside. I don't correct at that impression. The drive from Norfolk to Carteret, North Carolina, takes about 3 hours. I've made it so many times I can do it without thinking. Past the Outer Banks exit, past the water towers, past the old bait shop on 70 that's been half collapsed since 2011 but somehow still has a sign in the window that says open. It always makes me think about things that should be finished but aren't. My father, Walter Wallace, turned 74 that Saturday. He'd asked me to come down 3 weeks earlier, called me himself, which was unusual. Usually the invitations came through Diane, short and functional, like a memo. Party starts at noon. Dress nice. My father's call was different. He'd sounded older on the phone, quieter. He said, "Janet, I'd really like to see you." Just like that. No performance. So I went. The house is on Mulberry Street. A beige colonial with black shutters that Diane redecorated twice, since my father bought it in 1987. The rose bushes my mother planted along the front walk are gone now, replaced with ornamental grasses that require very little feeling to maintain. I noticed that the first time they disappeared, years ago, and I never said a word about it. That's a thing older people understand, I think. You learn which battles cost more than they're worth. You get quiet about certain losses and just carry them instead. I parked across the street and looked at the house for a while. I thought about my mother. She died when I was 9. Ovarian cancer. Fast and indifferent the way cancer sometimes is. My father grieved hard, the way men of his generation often do. Silently, practically, by staying busy and marrying someone new within 3 years. I don't say that as a cruelty. He was lonely and Diane was there, and I was barely home by then anyway, finishing high school and already pointed toward the Navy like a compass that had found its north. But I remember the first time Diane looked at me. Really looked, I mean, that measuring kind of look. The kind that decides something before you've even opened your mouth. I was 17. I'd come home on a weekend pass from boot camp prep, still too skinny, still figuring out how to stand right. She's looked at me the way someone looks at furniture in a room they're about to redesign. I've thought about that look a lot over the years. I checked my phone. A text from my friend Rosalie back in Norfolk. "Don't let her get to you. Eat the cake. Come home." I smiled at that. Rosalie is 62 and has known me since I was 31 and still says things like, "Just eat the cake," with the total confidence of a woman who has solved most of life's problems through practical instruction. I got out of the car. The drizzle had softened to almost nothing. just a gray dampness in the air that smelled like low tide and cut grass. Someone nearby was cooking bacon. A door slammed down the block. The world was going about its Saturday morning without any particular interest in what I was walking into. That's always how it is, isn't it? The big moments, they never announce themselves. You just step into them wearing the wrong shoes and hoping for the best. The walk to the front door is maybe 30 feet. I counted them once when I was a teenager coming home late and trying to be quiet. 30 feet takes about 8 seconds at normal pace. I took longer than that on this particular morning. I rang the bell. Deanne opened the door. She was dressed already. Pressed slacks, a blue cardigan, pearl earrings. She looked like she'd been up since 6, preparing to look effortless. Her smile was the kind that arrives exactly on time, hitting her face like a light switch flipped. "Not warm. Punctual, Janet," she said. "You made it. Not glad you're here, not good to see you. Just the bare acknowledgement of presence, like a name checked off a list." "I made it," I said. She stepped back to let me in, and I crossed the threshold into the smell of pot roast and floor wax and the particular staleness of a house where the windows don't get opened very often. My father was in the living room in his good chair, and when he saw me, his face did something it hadn't done in years. It just opened, like a window. Like all the careful composure fell away, and what was left was just my dad, 74 years old, a little thinner than last year, genuinely happy to see me. "There she is," he said. I sat with him for 20 minutes before the other guests arrived. He asked about Hendrix. He asked about the drive. He didn't ask about work, which was usual, and I didn't offer, which was also usual. We talked about the kind of things fathers and daughters talk about when they've lost years of practice and are trying not to show it, carefully, gently, the way you walk on ice you're not sure will hold. It was enough. It was more than enough. The guests started arriving around noon, and I settled into the background, the way I always do. Old habits. Pour your own drink. Find the corner where you can see the whole room. Say the right things when spoken to. Volunteer nothing. I was doing exactly that, standing near the bookcase with a glass of sweet tea, when I noticed the older man come in through the side door. He was tall, even now. Maybe 77, 78, with a straight back that some people never lose, and a way of moving through a room like he was still used to people stepping aside. His hair was white and cut short, and his eyes were the pale gray of shallow water. He didn't know anyone at that party, but he was looking at me like he did. Deanne noticed him before I could ask anyone who he was. She crossed the room in that particular way she has. Smooth, purposeful, the hostess walk, the one that means I am in charge of this space and everything in it. She touched the older man's elbow and said something I couldn't hear over the noise of the party, and he nodded politely, but his eyes didn't follow her. They stayed on me. I looked away first, something I trained myself to do a long time ago. Not to stare, not to give anything away, not to let curiosity show on my face in a room full of people I don't fully trust. It's a professional habit that has occasionally made me seem cold at family gatherings. I've made my peace with that. I drifted toward the kitchen. Diane had put out the kind of spread that was more about appearances than appetite. Little sandwiches cut into triangles, a cheese board with 3 kinds of crackers, a bowl of mixed nuts that nobody was touching. There was a pot roast in the oven that smelled genuinely good and didn't fit the aesthetic of anything else on the table. That was probably my father's contribution. Walter Wallace has never in his life cared about aesthetic. He cares about whether a thing is good. My father's sister, Aunt Carol, found me at the kitchen counter and pulled me into a hug that smelled like Chanel No. 5 and hairspray. She is 71 and loud in the best way and has always treated me like I was worth the full volume. "You look thin," she announced. "I'm exactly the same as last year, Aunt Carol." "You look thin and tired, and you need to eat something that isn't that cheese board, because that cheese board is depressing." She thrust a plate of pot roast toward me. "Your father made it himself. 6 a.m. he was in that kitchen. I ate the pot roast. It was very good." Some things about fathers don't change, and I held on to that. Carol drifted back toward the living room, and I stayed where I was, half hidden behind the kitchen doorframe, watching the party through the pass-through window, the way I used to watch things as a kid, present but not quite inside, observing from just outside the frame. Some people grow out of that. I didn't. Deanne was working the room. That's the only way to describe it. She moved from cluster to cluster, like a bee, visiting flowers, touching arms, laughing at the right moments, refilling drinks before they were empty. She was good at it. I'll give her that. She has always been very good at performing warmth for people whose opinions she wanted. For the people whose opinions didn't matter to her, she was different. I watched her pause at my father's chair. She adjusted the pillow behind his back, smoothed his collar, said something that made him smile, and I felt something complicated in my chest. Not jealousy exactly. More like grief with nowhere to put itself. She had been there for 26 years. She had made his coffee and driven him to his appointments and known which side of the bed he preferred. That was real. That counted for something. It didn't cancel out what she'd done, but I'd learned not to need it to. I was rinsing my plate in the sink when I heard her voice behind me, closer than expected. "You seem uncomfortable," Diane said. I turned around. She was standing in the kitchen doorway with her arms folded and her smile adjusted to a lower setting. The private one, the one the party guests didn't get. "I'm fine," I said. "You always stand in corners." "You've been doing it since you were 17. She tilted her head. "People notice. I don't think they do." A small pause. She glanced at my plate, then back at my face. "Still doing that government work?" "Still doing that government work." She made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. A breath with an opinion in it. "All those years of training, and you're pushing papers somewhere in Norfolk." She picked up a dish towel and folded it neatly, the way she does everything. Precise, deliberate, each crease straight. "I always thought you'd have more to show for it by now. That's all." Older Americans understand something about that kind of cut. It's not the words themselves, it's the delivery. Gentle, almost caring, shaped exactly like concern, so that if you react to it, you're the one who's being unreasonable. I'd been on the receiving end of Diane's concern my entire adult life. I knew its dimensions by heart. "Thank you for having me," I said. "The pot roast is really good." Something moved behind her eyes. Not regret. More like frustration. The frustration of a woman who has spent years trying to provoke a reaction from someone who won't give her one. She set the dish towel down and walked back toward her party. I exhaled. The afternoon moved the way these things do, slowly, then in bursts. Cake came out at 3, the kind from a bakery box, white with blue frosting that said "Happy Birthday, Walter" in looping letters. People sang. My father looked embarrassed and pleased in equal measure. I stood at the back of the group and sang along and caught his eye over everyone's heads, and he winked at me the way he used to when I was small. That wink. I'd driven 3 hours for that wink. I was helping stack plates when I felt it. That particular awareness, the kind that comes from years of learning to track everything in a room without looking like you're tracking it. Someone was watching me. I turned slowly. The old man with the gray eyes was standing near the fireplace, 8 feet away, holding a glass of water he hadn't touched. Up close, he was even more upright than he'd seemed across the room. His suit was dark and quiet and well-fitted, not showy. The clothes of someone who had spent a lifetime knowing the difference between rank and noise. He looked at me for a long moment. Then he said very quietly, so that only I could hear it above the party sounds and the last notes of someone's conversation fading out. He said it carefully, like a question he already knew the answer to. "Pardon me. Is your name Janet Wallace?" I said yes, and something crossed his face. Not surprise, but the particular relief of a man who has been carrying something heavy for a very long time and has just found the place he was always supposed to set it down. "I thought so," he said softly. "You have her eyes." I didn't know what that meant. I didn't know who he was. And before I could ask, Diane appeared at his elbow again, like she'd been watching from across the room, waiting, and steered him gently but firmly toward my father's chair on the other side of the room. I stood very still, near the fireplace, where the old man had been standing. I noticed for the first time what was on the mantel, a small cast iron grate, the kind you burn paper in on cold nights. And I noticed, without meaning to, that the grate smelled faintly of ash, even in May. I know what burning paper smells like. It has a specific quality, not like wood smoke, not like leaves in October. It's thinner, drier. It has a kind of finality to it that other smells don't. When I was 26, on my third deployment, I spent 4 days in a forward operating base in Djibouti, where they burned classified documents every morning at Zo 600 in a steel drum behind the communications tent. I can still conjure that smell in an instant. My brain filed it under permanent. Standing near Diane's fireplace with a stack of cake plates in my hands, I filed it again. I set the plates down on the side table and looked at the grate more carefully. It was clean, swept, the kind of clean that takes effort, that gets done with a brush and a purpose. The andirons were polished. Everything was deliberate. I thought about all the times I had written to this address, not to Diane, never to Diane. I had written to my father, birthday cards, the occasional letter when I was somewhere I couldn't call. A postcard from Bahrain once that I'm fairly sure said nothing except, "I'm fine. The heat is impossible. Hendrix is with Rosalie. Small things." The bare minimum of staying connected across years and distance, and a woman who had made it very clear that the space between us was a preference she intended to maintain. But my father had always received them, or I had assumed he had. I thought about the postcard from Bahrain. He'd mentioned it the next time we spoke, I was almost certain. Or had he? I turned that memory over slowly, the way you turn a stone looking for what's underneath, and I wasn't sure anymore. I wasn't sure of a lot of things I had been sure of 10 minutes ago. The party was thinning now. It was past 4, and the early arriving guests were making their exit sounds. The long goodbyes, the slow coats, the 3 separate waves from the doorway. Aunt Carol kissed my father's cheek twice and told me to eat more and drove away in her green Buick that has a dent in the rear bumper. She has never explained and never will. The older man, the one with gray eyes and the straight back, had settled into a chair near the window across the room from my father. I watched him decline a second piece of cake with a small gesture of his hand, and I watched Diane watch him the way you watch something you're not sure you can control. Her smile had changed. The performance was still running, but the effort had gone up. Something about him frightened her. People over 60 tend to recognize that particular fear, not the loud kind, not the fear that makes people run or shout, the quiet kind. The fear of someone who has been managing a situation for a very long time and has just noticed that the situation may be about to stop cooperating. I moved through the remaining guests slowly, refilling drinks I didn't need to refill, straightening things that didn't need straightening, working my way toward the window. I was not in a hurry. I have spent a long time being patient. I owe your father a debt, the older man said. When I was close enough, I hadn't approached him directly. I'd stopped 2 feet away to pick up a napkin from the end table, just an ordinary gesture, and he said it without turning his head, the way experienced people do when they're talking to someone they don't want observed. "He's easy to like," I said. "That's true." He turned then and looked at me fully. Up close his eyes were the particular gray of deep Atlantic water. Not cold exactly, but serious. "Waited, he used to talk about you. Years ago, when we were both on the water, he showed me a photograph. You were in your dress whites. I processed that. You knew my father in the Navy? We crossed paths in the 80s. I was further up the chain. A pause. He was very proud of you. Is. He speaks of you the same way now." The present tense landed quietly. "I didn't know he talked about me," I said. "He always has." The older man's jaw moved slightly, like he was deciding something. "Janet? Do you mind if I call you Janet? Have you had much correspondence lately?" "Letters, I mean. The old-fashioned kind." The question arrived with a specific weight. I looked at him. "Not that I'm aware of." Something passed over his face. Not surprise. The other thing, that relief and grief mixed together that I'd seen when he first looked at me across the room. He nodded once, slowly, like a man confirming a calculation he'd hoped was wrong. I see, he said. He said nothing else. But his eyes moved, just briefly, just for half a second, toward the fireplace, toward the clean grate and the polished andirons and the ash smell that had no business being there in May. I followed his gaze. When I looked back, he was watching me with an expression that I have only seen on the faces of people who have been carrying the truth for a long time and are no longer sure it was the right thing to do. Across the room, Diane materialized. She had the particular radar of a woman who has spent decades monitoring conversations she wasn't part of. She came toward us with fresh purpose, a hostess with a destination, and I watched her calculate the distance and adjust her smile. 8 feet. 6 feet. 4. The older man didn't look at her. He kept his eyes on mine, and then, with Diane still 2 steps away, with the party noise washing around us, and the smell of pot roast coming from the kitchen, and a Sinatra song starting low on the radio in the hallway, with all of it, just like that. He said it, quickly, almost gently, the way you say a name you've been holding in your mouth for 19 years. Pardon me for asking, a beat. The gray eyes steady. But, are you Ember? The room didn't stop. The music kept going. My father was laughing at something on the other side of the space, and someone near the door was putting on their coat. The world kept moving anyway. I didn't answer right away. I stood very still with the question between us, and in my peripheral vision I watched Diane stop walking. She had heard it, and she had gone the particular pale of a woman who thought a door was sealed shut and has just heard it open. I looked at him for a long moment. Then I said, "Who are you?" He reached into the inside pocket of his suit jacket, slowly, no performance, and produced a small card. He held it out with 2 fingers, the way people do when they want you to know they're not trying to prove anything. I took it. The card was plain. Navy letterhead, retired. The name printed on it was Rear Admiral Harlan Pike, USN, retired. I read it twice. Harlan Pike. I knew that name. Not from parties or conversations. From a briefing document I had read 11 years ago in a windowless room in Bahrain, when I was being considered for a leadership position that required them to explain to me, in clinical language, the full weight of what my unit's record meant. His name had been attached to a commendation. His name had been attached to the unit I had served under before I commanded my own. His name had been attached, in ways I had never fully traced, to the night of the storm. I looked up from the card. He was watching me with those gray Atlantic eyes, and he was not rushing me, and he was not permutations. He simply had it, the real kind, the kind that gets built over decades of waiting for things that matter. You knew my unit, I said. I commanded the fleet that covered your operational zone, he said. From 2003 to 2009, the math was immediate and involuntary. 2007, the storm, the Anderson rescue. 26 men on a foundering vessel in 40-foot seas off Cape Hatteras. Engine room flooded, radio intermittent, my rescue swimmers in the water for 3 hours and 40 minutes. 25 men brought home, 1 not. Admiral Pike, I said. Yes, 1 word. But the way he said it, the particular compression of it, the weight behind it, told me that he already knew what I was calculating. He had been living inside that same calculation for a long time. Diane had not moved. She was standing 5 feet away with her arms at her sides and her face doing something I had never seen it do before. Not the performance. Not the careful hostess smile, or the measured concern, or the architectural warmth she deployed for people whose opinions she wanted. Something underneath all of that. Something that looked, for the first time in 26 years, like genuine fear. My father was still across the room. He hadn't noticed any of this yet. He was deep in conversation with one of his old fishing buddies, the 2 of them leaning toward each other over a shared joke the way old men do, comfortable, unhurried, outside of what was happening near the window. Entirely. I took a breath. Admiral, I said, keeping my voice even. Keeping it low, my name is Janet Wallace. I work for the government. I don't know what you think you know about me, Commander Wallace, he said. Quietly, firmly, not unkind, EMBER. Naval Air Station Oceana. Rescue Swimmer Division, 2004 through 2009. Navy Cross recipient, 2008, classified commendation. Current assignment, Naval Station Norfolk, search and rescue coordination. Commander grade, he paused. I know exactly who you are. I've been trying to reach you for 19 years. The Sinatra song had ended. Someone had turned the radio down. In the new quiet, his voice had not been loud, but it had been clear. And the room, the remaining guests, my father's fishing buddy, Aunt Carol, who had apparently not left yet, and was standing by the coat rack with her purse in her hands, all of it had shifted. The way rooms do when something true has been said in them, and everyone has registered it before they've decided how to respond. My father had gone still in his chair. I looked at Diane. She was looking at Admiral Pike, and the fear on her face had changed shape. It had gotten smaller and more specific. It was the face of a woman who has been holding a secret, so long she'd almost convinced herself it didn't exist anymore, and has just watched it walk through her front door in a dark suit and sit down and refuse to leave. 19 years, I said. 1 letter a year, he said. Every December. To this address, he glanced at the fireplace. Then back at me. They were never returned. I assumed you had received them and chosen not to respond. I respected that choice. It was your right. A pause. Careful and precise as a depth charge. It was only recently that I learned otherwise. The room was very quiet. My father said from across it, Janet, not alarmed, not accusing, just present. The way my father has always been present in moments he didn't fully understand yet, waiting for someone to explain it to him in a way he could hold. I didn't answer him yet. I was still looking at Diane, and Diane was looking at the floor, not at the fireplace, not at me, not at Admiral Pike or my father or Aunt Carol by the coat rack, at the floor, with the particular stillness of a person who has run out of directions to look. 1 letter a year, I said again. Slowly 19 letters, Admiral Pike said. 19. I did the arithmetic without meaning to. 19 Decembers. 19 times someone had written to this address for me. 19 times the mail had arrived and been sorted and dealt with before it could reach me. 19 years of something I was never told existed. I had lived 48 years on this earth. I had stood in 40-foot seas and put rescue swimmers into black water and made decisions that I would carry for the rest of my life. I had learned to be very still in moments that wanted to undo me. I was still now. What did they say? I asked. My voice was steady. I was proud of that. Admiral Pike looked at me with those serious gray eyes, and for just a moment, just a fraction of a second, his composure moved the way deep water moves when something passes through it far below the surface. They said. He began, and then he stopped. He looked at the fireplace once more, at the clean grate, the polished andirons, the ash that shouldn't have been there in May. Perhaps, he said quietly, it would be better if I told you somewhere less public. But my father was crossing the room now. Slowly, using his cane, his birthday cake untouched on the table behind him. And Aunt Carol had not left, and the fishing buddy had gone silent. And every person still remaining in that house was watching the window, where an admiral and a woman who worked for the government were standing very close together in the particular gravity of something long overdue. Diane finally looked up from the floor. She looked at me, and I saw it. Just for a moment, raw and unmistakable before she could arrange her face again. Not defiance, not anger. Something older and quieter and far more difficult. She knew I knew, and she knew, at last, that knowing had arrived 19 years too late to stop. My father reached us before I could say anything else. He moved slowly with the cane, but he moved with purpose. The way Walter Wallace has always moved toward things that matter. Not fast, but without hesitation. He looked at Admiral Pike first, the way men of his generation do, taking measure before anything else. Harlan, my father said. As I turned. You know him? We served together, briefly. A long time ago, my father's voice was careful. He was reading the room the way he used to read weather off the water, quietly, without announcing what he saw. He looked at me then. Janet, what's happening? I thought about how to answer that. People over 60 know something about this particular moment. The one where you are standing in a room full of people you love, and you have just learned something that will rearrange every memory you have of the last 2 decades. And you have to decide, in real time, whether to let it detonate right now or carry it somewhere quieter first. I have made that calculation in worse places than my father's living room. I have made it in the water, in the dark, with the wind screaming and a man's life in my hands. I looked at my father. 74 years old, a little thinner, the wink he gave me over the birthday cake. Nothing yet, I said. Give me a few minutes, he nodded. He trusted me. He always had, even when he had no reason to, even when I'd given him so little to work with. That trust has always felt like something I owed a debt on. I turned back to Admiral Pike. Tell me about the letters, I said. Here, now. He looked at me for a moment, assessing, then nodded once. My son's name was Thomas, he said. The room got quieter. Not because anything changed. The radio was still low in the hallway. Someone's coat was still draped over the chair by the door. But because the name landed with the specific gravity of a name that belongs to someone who is no longer living. And everyone in earshot understood that immediately. He was 23 years old, Admiral Pike continued. Aviation rescue swimmer. Attached to your unit out of Oceania. He had been in the Navy for 18 months, I knew. I had always known which name was coming. Some names you carry without saying them, the way you carry weight in a pack. Distributed, constant, present in everything but never set down. Thomas Pike had been in my unit for 7 months before the storm. He was from Charlottesville, Virginia. He liked country music and was terrible at poker, and could stay underwater longer than anyone I had ever trained. He called his mother every Sunday without fail. He had my voice in his head when he went back into the water. That was the thing I had never been able to put down. I had trained him. I had told him, in a classroom in Oceania 18 months before the storm, that a rescue swimmer's first obligation is to the living, that you make your count, you bring in who you can bring in, you do not trade a certain life for an uncertain one. I had said those words and meant them and believed them, and Thomas Pike had sat in the 3rd row and written them down. And then on the night of the Anderson rescue, with 25 men already in the helicopter and 1 man still unaccounted for in the water, Thomas had gone back in, against the order to stand down, against everything I had taught him, against everything except the thing underneath the teaching, which was this. You don't leave people. He had found the 26th man, got him to the surface, got him breathing, and then the wave came, and Thomas didn't. I had written the report. I had written it in the flat, precise language of official documents, the language that turns human things into facts and facts into files, and I had filed it and been commended for the rescue and gone back to work and carried Thomas Pike's name in my chest like a stone for 11 years. He went back in, I said. My voice was level. It cost me something. He went back in, Admiral Pike confirmed. I ordered him not to. I know, he saved the man. He did. A pause. The grandfather clock in the hallway ticked. Outside, a car passed on Mulberry Street, unhurried, going somewhere ordinary. I blamed myself, I said. It was the first time I had said it plainly out loud to another person, not to Rosalie, not to the Navy counselor I saw twice in 2009 and then stopped seeing because the sessions made me feel like I was being observed through glass. Not to anyone. I trained him. I put those instincts in him. If I had trained him differently, Commander Wallace, Admiral Pike's voice was quiet, but it stopped me completely. EMBER, listen to me. I listened. I was at his funeral, he said. I stood at his grave in January of 2008 in the rain, and I was so angry I couldn't see clearly for weeks afterward. I want you to know that I am not going to tell you that I grieved neatly or that I found peace quickly. I didn't. He paused. But I also spoke to the 26th man, the one Thomas brought back. I went still. His name is Dale Mercer, Admiral Pike said. He's from Knoxville, Tennessee. He has 3 children. He coaches his youngest son's Little League team. He is alive because my son went back into the water. Another pause. Dale Mercer told me what happened out there. He told me that when Thomas got him to the surface and got him breathing, Thomas said something to him, told him to hold on, told him someone was coming. I wasn't breathing particularly well. Thomas believed someone was coming, Admiral Pike said, because you had taught him that a team does not leave its people. He didn't go back in spite of your training, Commander. He went back because of it. The grace stayed serious and completely without performance. The thing you put in him was not recklessness. It was devotion. And devotion in a rescue swimmer costs what it costs. The clock ticked. I had spent 11 years with a stone in my chest. I felt it shift, not dissolve, not disappear. Grief doesn't work like that. Any woman who has carried it long enough knows that it doesn't vanish. It just changes shape. Becomes something you can set down occasionally, instead of something that sets you down. But it shifted. For the first time in 11 years, in my father's living room in Carteret, North Carolina, with the smell of pot roast in the air and a rear admiral standing in front of me in a quiet dark suit, it shifted. The letters, I said. My voice was rough at the edges now. I let it be. All 19 of them said exactly that, he told me, in different ways, every December. Because I thought you needed to hear it, and I didn't know any other way to reach you. I looked at the fireplace, at the clean grate, at the ash that shouldn't have been there in May. And then I looked at Diane. She hadn't moved. That was the thing I kept coming back to. In the middle of everything, with my father standing 3 feet away and Aunt Carol still frozen by the coat rack, and Admiral Pike's words still settling through me like sediment through water, Diane had not moved. She was standing in the same spot she'd stopped in 20 minutes ago, arms at her sides, and she was looking at me with an expression I had never seen on her face in 26 years. Not defiance. Not the careful hostess smile or the measured concern she deployed like a tool. Something stripped down. Something cornered. I have seen that look before. Not on her. On other people, in other circumstances. In moments where the story someone has been telling themselves for years has just been interrupted by a fact they cannot argue with. It is the look of a person whose internal architecture is shifting and who has not yet figured out how to stand in the new configuration. I walked toward her. Not fast. Not with anger in my body. I was careful about that. Deliberately careful. The way I am careful about things that matter. I have learned over a long career of high-stakes decisions that the moments where you most want to move fast are usually the moments that most require you to slow down. I stopped 2 feet in front of her. Diane, I said. She looked at me. I need to understand something, I said. I need you to tell me, right now in front of my father, did you receive letters at this address, addressed to me, that I never saw? The room was completely still. My father made a sound. Not words, just a sound, low and involuntary, the kind a person makes when something they had no idea was coming, arrives suddenly and lands. Deanne's jaw moved. Once. Twice. It was a long time ago, she said. It was not a denial. My father said, Diane, just her name. But the way he said it, I had not heard my father use that tone in my lifetime. Quiet and final and stripped of every accommodation he had extended over 26 years. She turned to him. Walter, how many? He said. She looked at the floor again. That same floor she'd been looking at since Admiral Pike said my call sign. I don't know exactly. How many, Diane? A long pause. The grandfather clock ticked 4 times in the silence. They came every December, she said. For a long time my father closed his eyes. I watched him do it. Watched him close his eyes and stand very still with his cane and do whatever a 74-year-old man does inside himself when he learns that a thing he trusted was not what he believed it to be. He didn't speak. He didn't move. He just stood there and processed it the way men of his generation process things. Inwardly, quietly, with a stillness that looks like calm and isn't. I turned back to Diane. Why? I asked. She looked up. And for the first time, the very first time in 26 years, I saw something in Diane Wallace's face that I had not expected to find there. Not malice. Not the cold calculation of a woman who had set out to cause harm. Something smaller than that, and in its seat, sadder. You were always going to come back, she said. Her voice was low and unsteady, like a frequency finding its signal. Every time you deployed, every time you were gone, your father talked about you like you were the most important thing, like you were the whole story, and everything else was just background. She stopped. Her hands were tight at her sides, and I thought, if someone was writing to you, if someone out there still had a connection to all of that, to that life, you'd come back and there would be this whole world you had that had nothing to do with us. And she stopped again. You'd leave, I said. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. People over 60 understand something about this kind of fear. It isn't evil, exactly. It doesn't announce itself as cruelty. It arrives dressed as protection, as practicality, as reasonable management of a situation that feels uncontrollable. It tells itself it is acting in the interest of the family, of stability, of the life that has been carefully constructed. It is still wrong. The dressing doesn't change the thing underneath. But understanding what a fear is made of is different from excusing what it made someone do. I understood it. I did not excuse it. Those letters, I said, keeping my voice even, were written by a man who lost his son, who spent 19 years trying to tell me that his son's death was not my fault. 19 Decembers. 19 times he sat down and wrote, because he thought I needed to hear it, and he had no other way to reach me. I paused. Let that land. I spent 11 years believing I was responsible for Thomas Pike's death. 11 years carrying that. And for 11 of those years, the answer was sitting in this house. The room was absolutely silent. Aunt Carol had stopped pretending to look for her keys. Admiral Pike was very still near the window, watching with those gray eyes, not intervening, giving the room what it needed. My father opened his eyes. He looked at Diane for a long time. She looked back at him, and whatever passed between them in that look was private and long, and I did not try to read all of it. 26 years is 26 years. A marriage is a weight that two people carry together, and you cannot always see from the outside which parts are load-bearing. But my father reached out and took my hand. Just that. Just his hand around mine, the way he used to hold it when I was small, and we walked to the end of the dock together to watch the boats come in. His grip was older now, thinner but steady. I didn't know, he said. To me, not to Diane. To me. I know you didn't, I said, and I meant it. My father is not a complicated man. He is decent and quiet and sometimes too willing to let things be managed by other people, because management exhausts him, and he has always preferred the water to the conflict. He did not know. I was certain of that in the same way I was certain of the tides, Deanne said. Very quietly, I kept them. The room moved. I turned back to her slowly. The letters, she said. Her voice had changed. Something in it had finally, after 26 years, come down. I didn't. I never burned all of them. I told myself I did. But I kept them. They're in a box in the top of the hall closet, behind the winter blankets. The grandfather clock ticked. Outside on Mulberry Street, a mockingbird was running through its catalog of stolen songs. Indifferent and persistent and absolutely alive. Admiral Pike made a sound. Just a breath. But I heard in it 19 years of December mornings sitting down at a desk and writing to a woman he thought had chosen silence. I looked at the hallway, at the closet at the end of it, at the door that had been closed my entire life. I walked down the hallway alone. Nobody followed me. Nobody offered to come. I think they all understood, in the way that rooms sometimes collectively understand things, that this was not a moment that needed witnesses. My father held his cane. Admiral Pike stood at the window. Diane did not move. Aunt Carol, bless her, finally found something to do with her hands and started quietly stacking cups on the kitchen counter, giving the moment its privacy the only way she knew how. The hallway smelled like the rest of the house. Floor wax, pot roast, the faint lavender of a plug-in air freshener near the bathroom door. I had walked this hallway 100 times, maybe more. Home from deployments, home for holidays, home for the careful orchestrated visits that Diane managed like a stage production with very limited showtimes. I had never once opened the closet at the end of it. It was a bifold door, white painted wood, the kind that sticks slightly in humid weather. It stuck now. I pulled it open with one hand and stood looking at the shelves, top shelf. Behind the winter blankets, she had said there were 2 wool blankets, one green, one ivory, folded with the kind of precision that is less about order and more about habit. Behind them, pushed to the back corner where the shelf met the wall, was a shoebox, brown, the lid slightly warped from age. The kind of box you buy winter boots in and then keep forever, because getting rid of it feels like admitting something. I reached up and took it down. It was heavier than I expected. I stood in the hallway with the box in my hands, and I did not open it right away. I just held it for a moment, felt the weight of it. The specific and irreducible weight of 19 years of December mornings compressed into cardboard and paper and ink. 19 times Harlan Pike had written. 19 times he had sealed an envelope and addressed it to this house and sent it into what he believed was silence. 19 times Diane had intercepted it. 19 times she had held it in her hands and made a decision. And then, apparently, not every time, not always, she had opened the closet and put it in a box and told herself that was different from burning. I thought about that distinction. The one she had made between destroying something and simply hiding it. I thought about all the distinctions people make to keep living with themselves, all the small reclassifications that allow a person to continue looking in the mirror. I have made some of my own over the years. I do not say that with pride. I say it because it's true, and because the truth is the only thing that has ever actually helped me with anything. I carried the box back down the hallway. When I came back into the living room, everyone was exactly where I had left them, like a photograph taken in my absence. My father with his cane, Admiral Pike by the window. Diane in the middle of the room, arms at her sides, looking at the box in my hands with the expression of someone watching the last possible version of a thing finally become the only version. I set the box on the coffee table. I looked at Diane. "Did you read them?" I asked. A long pause. "Some of them," she said. "Not all." "Which ones?" "The early ones," she said it quietly. "The first 3 or 4. After that, I didn't read them anymore. But you kept them?" "Yes. Why?" She looked at the box, at the warped lid and the brown cardboard and all the weight inside it. And I watched her try to find the answer that would explain it, the answer that would make it make sense, and I watched her not find it. Because there are some things we do that do not make sense, and the only honest thing to do with them is say so. "I don't know," she said finally. I told myself I'd deal with it later. Every year I told myself that. And then later kept being later, and the box kept being there, and I didn't know how to go back. My father said Diane, her name again, but different now. Not the flat, final tone of before, something older and more tired. The voice of a man who has decided he will deal with this, but not today, not all of it today, because he is 74 years old, and it is his birthday and some things require more time than an afternoon. He looked at me. "Open it," he said. I opened the box, 19 envelopes. All of them intact, sealed, or with the flap tucked in, or in 3 cases very carefully resealed with tape that had gone yellow and brittle with age. Each one addressed in the same handwriting, a disciplined cursive. The penmanship of a man who had grown up before keyboards, who had learned to write as a form of precision rather than speed. Each one addressed to Miss Janet Wallace at my father's house on Mulberry Street. The return address on every envelope read, H. Pike, USN, no rank, no title. Just the initial and the name and the branch, the way military people sometimes write when they are writing as a person rather than as a rank. I picked up the oldest one, December 2006. The paper of the envelope had gone soft with age, the way paper does when it has been kept in a closed space for a long time, absorbing the particular quiet of disuse. I turned it over. Sealed. Never opened. I picked up the next one. December 2007. The one written in the December after the storm, after Thomas. This one had been opened and resealed with the yellow tape. Dion had read this one. I looked up at her. She was looking at the envelope in my hands, and the fear had gone. And what was left in its place was something rawer and quieter. Something that looked, finally, like the beginning of understanding what a thing has cost. I looked at Admiral Pike. He was watching the envelope in my hands with an expression that I will not try to fully describe because some expressions belong to the person wearing them and should not be translated. But his hands, which had been still at his sides the entire time, had moved. He had pressed them flat against his thighs the way people do when they are trying to stay composed, and it is requiring genuine effort. "May I?" I asked him. He nodded. I opened the December 2007 letter. The handwriting inside was the same disciplined cursive as the outside. But the pressure was different. Heavier in some places, lighter in others. The way handwriting gets when the person writing it is not entirely steady. I read the first 3 lines, then I stopped. I looked up at Diane, and I said, very quietly, the thing I had been holding back since the moment I understood what 19 years of December mornings meant. I said it without anger, without performance, without any of the careful architecture I usually maintain between myself and the moments that most want to undo me. He wrote to tell me it wasn't my fault, I said. In December of 2007. 4 months after Thomas died. He sat down and he wrote to tell me it wasn't my fault. I set the letter down, and you read it. And you put it in a box. The room held that. Diane opened her mouth. Closed it. I can't explain it, she said. I know that's not enough. No, I said. It isn't. My father reached over and put his hand on my arm, not to stop me, not to intervene, just to be there. The way he had been there in the hallway when I was 9 years old, and my mother was dying, and he didn't know what to say. And so he just put his hand on my arm and stood with me in the hard thing. Some things about fathers, they stay. Outside, the mockingbird was still singing its catalog of stolen songs. The afternoon light had shifted to the low gold of early evening, slanting through the living room windows, and making everything look briefly warmer than it was. Admiral Pike picked up his glass of water from the windowsill. He looked at Diane with the gray Atlantic eyes, not cold, not punishing, tired. The specific tiredness of a person who has been carrying something for 19 years and has just arrived, finally, at the place where they were always supposed to set it down. Mrs. Wallace, he said, I think we have a great deal to talk about. Diane sat down on the couch. For the first time all afternoon, she sat down. We talked for 2 hours, not argued. Talked, which is a different thing and harder in some ways, because arguing has a shape to it, a familiar rhythm of advance and retreat that people know how to navigate. Talking, real talking, the kind where people say the true version of things instead of the defensible version, doesn't have that structure. It just goes where it goes, and you follow it and hope you come out somewhere better than where you started. My father sat in his good chair the whole time. He didn't say much. He asked 2 or 3 questions, precise and quiet. The way Walter Fullis asks questions when he is trying to understand something rather than win something. Aunt Carol had finally, definitively left. She hugged me at the door for a long time without saying anything, which is the most Carol thing she has ever done, and drove away in her green Buick with the dent in the bumper. That left the 4 of us. Me, my father, Diane, and Admiral Pike. Diane talked more than I expected. That surprised me. I had spent 26 years building a picture of her as a woman who managed things by not discussing them, by rerouting and redirecting and keeping conversations away from the rooms where the real things lived. And she was that woman. But she was also, it turned out, a woman who had been carrying a box in a closet for 19 years and had never once talked to anyone about it. And there is a particular kind of exhaustion that comes from that kind of long silence, and when it finally breaks, it breaks completely. She talked about the first letter. December of 2006, the year before the storm. She had intercepted it in the afternoon mail, the way she intercepted most things addressed to me. Not with a plan, she said, but with a reflex that had calcified over years into something she no longer examined. She had recognized the Navy return address, and she had told herself she would give it to my father to forward to me. She had told herself that for a week. Then she had put it in a drawer. Then, months later, in the shoebox. She talked about reading the second letter, December of 2007, the one written after Thomas died. She said she had opened it because she had told herself she needed to know what it said. A rationalization so thin she could hear it crumbling even as she made it. She read it standing at the kitchen counter on a Tuesday afternoon in December, and when she finished it, she stood there for a long time and didn't move. I knew then, she said, what I had done, what I was doing. Her voice was steady, but it cost her. I told myself I'd tell you. When you came home for Christmas that year, I told myself I'd put the letters out on the table and tell you. She stopped. But you came home and you were so quiet, quieter than usual. And I told myself you were fine, that it would pass, that you didn't need. I wasn't fine, I said. I know. She looked at her hands. I know that now. It is a strange thing, sitting in a room with someone who has wronged you and watching them understand it fully for the first time. It is not satisfying the way you might expect. It doesn't fill the space that was emptied by the wrong thing. It just adds a new layer to the complexity, grief for what was lost, and then something else on top of it, something that doesn't have a clean name, that sits between anger and sorrow and the particular exhaustion of caring about something that hurt you. I was sitting with that unnamed thing when Admiral Pike said, "There's something else I should tell you." The room shifted slightly. Dale Mercer. He said the 26th man. The one Thomas had gone back for. The one from Knoxville, with the 3 children and the Little League team. He contacted me, Admiral Pike said, about 8 months ago. He'd been trying to find you for years. The official channels weren't giving him anything, which I understand. Privacy protocols. But he found me through a veterans network and he asked me to pass something along. He reached into the inside pocket of his suit jacket again, the same pocket where the card had been, and produced a folded piece of paper, standard white, the kind you put in a printer. He held it out to me. I took it. It was a letter, handwritten, 3 paragraphs, the penmanship of a working man rather than a career officer, large and uneven and completely sincere. I will not reproduce every word of it here because some things are private in a way that should stay private. But I will tell you what it said in its essence. It said, I have 3 kids. I coached my boys' Little League game last Saturday. I was there for my daughter's graduation. I was there when my wife needed surgery 2 years ago. And I sat in that hospital and held her hand, and I knew the whole time that none of it, none of a single day of it, would have existed without what happened off Cape Hatteras in 2007. I don't know how to thank a person for their whole life, but I wanted you to know that I'm living it. Every day, I'm living it. I read it twice. Then I folded it carefully along its original creases and held it in my hands. My father made a sound, just a breath. But I heard everything in it, the relief and the grief and the complicated love of a father who has watched his daughter carry something heavy for a very long time and has just seen someone help her set part of it down. I looked at Admiral Pike. Thomas knew what he was doing, I said. It was not a question he did, Admiral Pike said. He knew the risk. He made the choice. A pause. He was 23 years old, and he was very well trained, and he made the choice that his training and his character and everything he believed pointed him toward. That is not your fault. That is who he was. The low gold light had deepened now toward evening blue. Someone on Mulberry Street was running a lawnmower in defiance of the approaching dark. The mockingbird had finally gone quiet. The house smelled like cooling pot roast and old paper and the particular staleness of a space where something has just been let out that had been kept in for too long. Deanne said, "Janet." I looked at her. She was sitting very straight on the couch, hands flat on her knees, and she was looking at me the way she had never once looked at me in 26 years. Without the measuring quality, without the careful calibration of how much warmth to dispense and to whom, just looking. Like a woman who has finally stopped managing the room and is just in it. "I can't give them back," she said. "The years. The letters you didn't read. I can't give those back? No, I said. You can't. I know that's not enough, she said. I know sorry isn't enough. It isn't, I said. But it's where you start. She nodded. A small nod. The nod of a woman who has just accepted the terms of a very long road. My father, from his chair, said quietly, Janet, read the letters. I looked at the shoebox on the coffee table. 19 envelopes. 19 Decembers. All of it still intact, waiting the way things wait when they have nowhere else to go. I picked up the oldest one, December 2006. The first one. I opened it, and Harlan Pike, sitting across the room at 78 years old, watched me read the first words his son's commanding officer had never been allowed to receive and did not look away. 3 weeks passed. The drive back to Norfolk that night was the longest 3 hours I have ever spent in a car, and I have spent some long ones. I had the shoebox on the passenger seat. I had not finished reading the letters at my father's house. I had read 4 of them, sitting in the living room with the evening coming in through the windows and Admiral Pike across from me and Diane very still on the couch. 4 was all I could manage in one sitting. The rest I carried home. I read them over the following week, 1 per night at the kitchen table, with Hendrix asleep on my feet and a cup of coffee going cold beside me. I read them in order, December 2006 through December 2024, and I will tell you that it is a particular kind of experience, reading 19 years of someone's grief and grace compressed into 19 letters, each one different. Each one written by the same hand but at a different stage of the same long carrying. The early ones heavier, rawer, the penmanship under pressure. The later ones quieter, more settled, but never without weight. Never without Thomas. He wrote about his son in all of them, not extensively, not in a way that felt like performance or prolonged mourning, just in the way a father mentions a son. A detail here, a memory there, Thomas used to say. Thomas would have laughed at the small, ordinary specifics of a person held close, and in all of them, in different language, the same essential thing. It was not your fault. I want you to know that. I wanted you to know that from the beginning, I read the last letter, December 2024, and sat at my kitchen table for a long time afterward without moving, listening to Hendrix breathe, and the refrigerator hum and the distant sound of a freight train somewhere past the base perimeter. Then I got out a piece of paper and I wrote back. It took me 4 drafts. The first 3 were too much, too explanatory, too full of the 19 years in between, too weighted with everything I needed him to know that I hadn't meant for him to not know. The 4th draft was shorter. It said, Admiral Pike, I have read all 19 letters. I am sorry it took this long. I am grateful beyond what I can accurately put into words. I would like to meet if you're willing. Janet Wallace. I mailed it the next morning. Old-fashioned, the way he'd been writing to me. It seemed right. He called 2 days later. We met for coffee the following Saturday at a diner in Virginia Beach. The kind of place with red vinyl booths and coffee that comes in a pot that gets refilled without asking. We sat for 3 hours. We talked about Thomas. We talked about the Anderson rescue in a way I had never talked about it with anyone. Not with the flat precision of official language, not with the managed distance of therapy, but just talked about it the way 2 people talk about something that changed them, that costs them still, that they carry with something other than regret. At the end of it, he showed me a photograph. Thomas at 22, 1 year before the storm, in his rescue swimmer gear on the deck of a ship somewhere in the Atlantic. He was grinning, the kind of grin that belongs to a young man who is doing exactly the thing he was meant to do and knows it. The sun was behind him and the water was everywhere, and he looked capable, alive in the fullest sense. I held the photograph for a long time. He was good, I said. He was very good, Admiral Pike said. You made him better. I gave the photograph back carefully, and we finished our coffee and stood in the parking lot in the January wind off the water, and he shook my hand the way retired admirals shake hands. Firm, complete, both hands briefly. The gesture of a man who means it. We have had coffee 4 times since then. My father called me the morning after the party. He called early, before 7, which is unusual for him. He said, "Janet, I owe you an apology." I told him he didn't, that he hadn't known, that it wasn't his to apologize for. He said, "I know I didn't know, but I should have asked more questions years ago and I didn't. And a father who doesn't ask questions when his daughter goes quiet is a father who chose his own comfort over her truth. And I'm sorry for that. I didn't argue with him. I just said, 'Thank you, Dad,' and meant it." Diane did not call. For 2 weeks, nothing from Diane. I had not expected otherwise, and I will not pretend I spent those 2 weeks waiting. I was not waiting. I was living my life. Going to work, feeding Hendrix, having coffee with a retired admiral, reading letters at my kitchen table. The world kept moving the way it always does, indifferent to whether the human situations inside it have resolved themselves. Then, 17 days after the party, a letter arrived at my apartment in Norfolk, not email, a letter, an actual envelope, addressed in a handwriting I recognized from 19 years of someone else's envelopes. Not Admiral Pike's careful cursive, but something more irregular, less practiced. The handwriting of a woman who wrote letters rarely and was feeling her way through this one. The return address was my father's house on Mulberry Street. I stood at my kitchen counter and held it for a moment before I opened it, thinking about all the envelopes that had been held and not opened and put away into boxes. Then I opened it. It was 2 pages. The first page was difficult to read, not because of the handwriting, but because it was the kind of writing people do when they are not sure how to write what they need to write, when they are working through it on the page in real time, and the sentences don't always come out cleanly. She wrote about the box, about the decision she made the first time, and the decision she kept making for 19 years without ever re-examining it. She wrote about reading the 2007 letter and standing at the kitchen counter and not moving. She didn't excuse it. She tried, once, in the middle of the second paragraph, and then crossed it out. I could see the crossing out. Heavy ink over the words. A line drawn through the rationalization before it could finish forming. That mattered to me. That crossed-out sentence mattered to me more than most of the rest of it. The second page was shorter. It said, "I can't fix it, I know that. But I would like to try to do better if you'll allow it, not for my sake, for your father's, and maybe, eventually, for yours." I read it twice, then I put it in the shoebox with the 19 letters, because it belonged there. Because it was part of the same long story, the continuation of it, the place where the story began to turn from what was done to what might still be done differently. I did not write back that day, or the next. But on the third day, I sat down at my kitchen table with a piece of paper, and I thought about Thomas Pike grinning in the Atlantic sun. I thought about Dale Mercer coaching Little League in Knoxville. I thought about my father's hand around mine, steady and thin and there. And I wrote back, not much, not everything. Just enough to open the door a crack and leave it open, just enough to start. A year has passed. I'm sitting at my kitchen table in Norfolk on a December morning early, before the light comes up properly over the water. Hendrix is on my feet. The coffee is hot. Outside the window, the sky is the particular deep blue of the hour before dawn. Not black, not yet gray, just that specific in-between color that has always felt to me like the most honest part of the day, the part before everything performs itself. There is an envelope on the table in front of me, Admiral Pike's handwriting. December 2025. The 20th letter. I haven't opened it yet. I'm going to, in a few minutes. But I wanted to sit with it first, with the weight of it, the realness of it, the fact that this one arrived the way it was always supposed to arrive. No box, no closet, no 19-year delay. Just a letter from a man I have coffee with 4 times a year, arriving on a Tuesday in December the way it has always arrived, except this time I am here to receive it. That still gets me. Some mornings, that simple fact. I am here to receive it. A year is enough time to know which things have changed and which things haven't. My father and I talk more now. Not every day, that would be more than either of us knows how to manage, and we are both people who prefer depth to frequency. But regularly. He calls on Sunday mornings, early before church. We talk about Hendrix and the boats and what he's been cooking, and sometimes, when it comes up naturally, about my mother. He talks about her more now. I think the year has shifted something in him too, cracked something open that had been sealed for a long time, some door that Diane's particular management style had kept closed without either of them fully acknowledging it. He and Diane are still together. I know that might be difficult for some people to understand. It was difficult for me at first. That first month, I will not pretend otherwise. There were mornings when I sat with my coffee and felt the full weight of 19 Decembers and found it very hard to locate any generosity in myself. Those mornings existed. I am not going to smooth them over. But I have spent enough years making decisions under pressure to know the difference between a clean choice and a real one. My father loves her. That is real. 26 years of a life built together is real. Diane did a serious and lasting wrong, and she knows it. She will carry it, the way we carry the things we cannot give back. But she is also a woman who crossed out a sentence rather than let herself finish the rationalization. That matters. Not as an erasure. As a beginning, she and I are not close. We may never be close in the way that word usually means. But we are something, careful with each other, present in the same room without the old architecture of management and deflection between us. She asks me questions now, real ones, not the performance of interest. I answer them. It is slow and it is imperfect, and it is, I think, the most honest thing we have ever done with each other. That is enough for now. Admiral Pike and I had coffee last month, the Saturday before Thanksgiving, at the same diner in Virginia Beach with the red vinyl booths. He brought another photograph, Thomas at 18 before the Navy, grinning in the backyard of the house in Charlottesville with a dog that looked remarkably like Hendrix. I told him that. He laughed. It was a good laugh, the kind that comes from deep enough down to be real. We talked about the call sign. I had never told anyone outside of the Navy what EMBER meant. The designation had been assigned to me in 2004 by my unit, the way call signs always are. Chosen by the people around you based on something they've observed, something they've decided captures the essential quality of who you are when it counts. I had not chosen it and had not, at the time, entirely understood it. My dive supervisor, Chief Petty Officer Renata Voss, 63 now, retired, lives in Pensacola, had explained it to me the day they gave it to me. She said, "An ember isn't the fire. The fire is loud and obvious and everybody sees it. An ember is what's left after. It's what stays lit when everything else has gone out. It's what you start the next fire from." I told Admiral Pike that story. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Thomas used to talk about you before the storm. He called you Ember the way the others did, but he said it differently, like it meant something specific to him." He paused. "He told another swimmer once that you were the reason he believed the job was worth doing at its hardest, that you made the impossible look like a decision rather than a miracle." I thought about that for a long time on the drive home, a decision rather than a miracle. That is, I think, the truest thing anyone has said about the work. Not just rescue swimming, any work that asks everything of you. The miracle version of it lets you off the hook, makes it something that happens to you rather than something you choose. The decision version is harder and realer and more honest. You choose to go back, you choose to stay lit, you choose, every time, to be the thing that starts the next fire. Thomas chose. He chose because of what he was made of. And some of what he was made of came from a classroom in Oceanus in 2006, and a woman standing at the front of it who told him that a team does not leave its people. I have made my peace with that. Not the easy peace, not the kind that forgets what it cost, the other kind, the earned kind, the kind that holds the grief and the grace in the same hand and keeps walking. I pick up the envelope, Admiral Pike's 20th letter, December 2025. I open it. People over 60 know something that younger people are still learning, that the letters we are meant to receive do not always arrive on time. Sometimes they are delayed by years. Sometimes they are held in boxes in the backs of closets. Sometimes they are carried by the long way round, through grief and silence, and a stranger who shows up at a birthday party with gray eyes and a straight back and 19 years of patience. But they arrive. The ones that are meant for you, they find their way. If there is a letter in your life you have been waiting to receive or waiting to send, if there is something that has been held back by fear or pride or the long habit of silence, I hope you find your way to it, not someday. Soon. The world keeps moving anyway. We might as well move toward each other while we're in it.